Hi, Caribbean Chess Coach here again. This video is part 1 of my chess opening repertoire series on the Sicilian Kan. The Kan has been the backbone of my repertoire against 1e4 for the last decade. I will teach you the main tactical and strategic ideas for black and white along with game examples to illustrate the typical plans. The Sicilian in general is a combative opening as compared to other opening lines. It creates an imbalance from move 1. Black aims to get an asymmetrical position where they have chances to outplay their opponent. Let's compare e4 e5 versus e4 c5. e4 e5. White and black take equal territory in the center, but for sure white has a small plus as it is white's turn to play. All other board factors are equal. Let's continue down a logical path. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, undermining black's control over the center. This opening line is called the Scotch. All good players know that the best move is ex d4, giving up the center, as all other moves are significantly weaker. Many a player died after a sip of world champion Garry Kasparov's Scotch. Let's take stock of the position. After e takes d, knight takes d4, we enter what is known as the Scotch game. What has occurred? The exchange of central pawns has occurred, d4 for e5, but assessing what has remained, white still has an e4 pawn, and its central counterpart is on d7. Therefore, white has a spatial edge in the center. At this point, white has a structural advantage. On the other hand, let's take a look at the first moves of the Sicilian. e4, c5. White controls the center and prepares piece development. The move c5, although it controls the central square d4, only prepares the development of black's queen. This move should be a strategic mistake, right? As we know, one of the main opening tasks is to develop minor pieces, as white prepares to do, and not to bring out your queen too early, as black's move seemingly prepares. So why do 99% of the world's strongest players have the Sicilian defense in their repertoire? All the points I have stated thus far are surface deep. Let's dive deeper into the idea behind black's move. The move controls d4, but neglects minor piece development, which is correct. But what is the classical strategy for punishing an opponent who neglects minor piece development? It is to rip open the central lines and infiltrate the position before the development is completed. Let's continue logically for white. Knight f3, preparing d4, central break. There are many moves here, but the Kan move is e6. White plays d4, achieving the strategic aim to open the center. Black responds c takes d4, white recaptures with knight takes d4. Let's compare the can to the Scotch. The board position of the Scotch is on the right. White has a spatial plus as white control the d5 and f5 squares on black's half of the board, and black does not have a pawn counterpart that controls squares on white's half. White has the knight on d4, similarly to the position in the can. The main difference is black has the knight on c6 well developed. In summary, white has been able to undermine black's central position, achieving a trade of central pawns, being left with a spatial edge, as only white's pawn controls squares on the opponent's half of the board. Let's now critically assess what has transpired in the can position on the left. White has achieved his strategic aims of undermining black's central control and having a spatial edge. But this gain of the spatial edge has come at a significant cost. White has traded his d-pawn for black's c-pawn, a big concession, as white's d-pawn is more a central pawn and black's c-pawn is more of a wing pawn, meaning black got more out of the trade generally. Because white's d-pawn is gone and black has retained his e and d-pawn central duel, black has great prospects in the center for the middle game if black can comfortably complete the development. Strong players choose the Sicilian for these exact reasons. They know that they need imbalances in the position to play for a win. White will try to blast open the position and punish black for their lack of development. Black will try to catch up in development, prevent white from opening the position to their advantage, and then look to the middle game with bright prospects as black try to make use of the central majority. Enough of the generalities. Let's explore the interesting world of the Sicilian Kan. Let's start by reviewing the can move order. White plays e4. We respond c5. They go knight f3. We play pawn to e6. d4 going into the open Sicilian. We exchange our flank pawn for their central pawn. Knight takes d4, and we play the move a6. Persons may have been wondering why we play the move a6 and not make a normal developing move with the move knight f6. Let's analyze the move knight f6 instead of the move a6. We should understand that the move e5 is not possible here. It's just a blunder of a pawn. Pawn to e5, queen a5 check, forks both the pawn on e5 and the king on e1. And black will win a pawn. With no significant compensation. The problem with playing knight f6 here is that white will go knight c3, now preparing to push the e5 pawn, as we don't have the resource queen a5 with check anymore, as the diagonal has now been blocked by the knight on c3. If we meet knight c3 with the normal can move queen c7, trying to prevent e5, then we get hit. With the move knight d, b5, not only attacking our queen, but iron our weakness on d6. If the queen goes to c6, white gets development with tempo, as they're creating a threat of knight c7, forking the king and the rook on a8. To defend, knight a6 will put our knight in an inferior position on the edge of the board. Hence, why on move 4, we play the move a6, preventing these variations by white. Let's go over e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, and then we play the move a6. This is the Kan move order. Now that we have defended the b5 square, the queen in the future can come to c7, preventing the e5 pawn from harassing our pieces. One variation might go knight c3. We can now go queen c7, guarding the e5 square before developing the knight to f6. The first thing we should do is try to understand the opening, keeping in mind all good chess moves are connected to some aim. How can we be expected to make good logical moves if we do not know the aim or understand the logic of the position? The logic is derived from the elements of the position and the guiding strategic principles of the chess game. Graphically, it looks like this. First, we determine the logic. The logic informs the strategy. Stemming from the strategy, we create a plan, and our moves fit into our plan. Let's make an assessment of the strategic elements. The first element we would assess is the pawn structure. On the board, we have a position with only the pawn skeletons for both sides. It is important to understand the skeleton, as the skeleton dictates where the pieces will be best placed. To best understand the structure, we must assess both sides individually, then make a comparison between the two. Black has several pawns placed on the light squares. Hence, the dark square complex is weak. All of the squares highlighted in red are weak squares. As a consequence of the pawns being pushed, all the diagonals marked can potentially be entry points for white's pieces to enter the black's position. The dark squared bishop is very important in this skeleton, as it is the main defender of black's dark squared weaknesses. This bishop is the good bishop in the structure, as it is not hampered by its own pawns. Parting with this bishop should not be taken lightly. Pawn structure either favors or hampers a bishop. In this structure, where majority of the pawns are placed on light squares, the light square bishop is hampered by its own pawns. Therefore, we can conclude that it is what is classically referred to as the bad bishop of the structure. Black has quite a few weaknesses. The d7 pawn is backward, as both the c and e pawns have moved. The b7 pawn is a backward pawn, as the a pawn and the c pawn have gone ahead and left it. As a result of the trade on d4, Black now has a half-open c file to use for the rook. Let's now take a look at the white structure. White's pawn on e4 gives space and control over black's territory. This pawn can prove to be overextension if it is not supported well by white's pieces, and black is able to target it effectively. White has weak squares on c4, d4, and f4. These are not classical weaknesses where the squares can no longer be defended by pawns, but they are weak as an attempt to guard these squares with pawns will result in classical weaknesses, squares that can no longer be defended by pawns. The
The file is half open and is an avenue for white's rooks to become active.
White has more space and has potential to take more as black has not blockaded the e4 pawn by playing e5. White should refrain from piece trades as black's position is slightly cramped because of their lack of space. This space allows white mobility. For example, now the e-pawn has moved forward, white has access to the third rank. So we can easily imagine a rook lift. Rook e1 to e3, and then swinging either to the queen side or the king side to create pressure against black. White has a c-pawn without a counterpart. In many positions, this is not a significant factor, as generally, white's play is on the king side. Black has a more solid structure than white, as black's pawns are closer to their position. Black has less space. Piece trades, mainly minor piece trades, favor black. The closer black gets to the endgame, the more the e-pawn becomes overextension, as there are less pieces to support it. Black's biggest trump in the position is the d-pawn without a counterpart. If black gets in d5 under good circumstances, black is usually better. Let's now look at some game examples. e6, d4, c takes d, knight takes, and we enter the open Sicilian, a6. Knight c3, b5. Here, the main move, at this point, the main move is queen c7, preparing knight f6. But b5 was played in this game. Bishop e2, bishop b7. We notice targeting the e4 pawn, solving our bad bishop. Castle, queen c7. Transposing back into the normal lengths. Rook e1, knight c6, king h1. Now, ideally, white would want to continue expanding on the king side with the move f4. But this move has a tactical drawback. Knight takes d4. Now the queen and the king are along the same diagonal, and the move bishop c5 forces resignation by white. So king h1, preparing f4. Knight f6, now targeting the e4 pawn. f4 is played. This takes space, but black in the Kan usually aims to turn white's space into overextension, as we will see as this game progresses. Knight takes d4. We would have stated minor piece trades favor black, and black is able to develop his bishop with tempi. Queen d3, pawn to d6. Many times you don't want to allow white to clamp with the move e5, as this fixes our weak d7 pawn and allows white to get maneuvers like knight e4, where they can transfer to the king side or the queen side. So d6, protecting the square e5. Bishop f3, castle. White gets in e5, but at what cost? Here, the structure changes. Black gets the open d file, and the e5 pawn now is actually quite vulnerable, as it has no more protection from other pawns. This pawn is isolated and weak. Queen e2, knight d5, threatening to
break white structure with the move knight c3. Knight e4, typical move, maybe aiming to get to d6, or in some variations, the knight sacrifice on f6, as the g7 pawn is very important in guarding the black king. Bishop e7, simply keeping the important bishop to the structure. Knight f2, allowing the queen and the rook to add support to the weak e5 pawn. Rook c8. We would have previously stated that one of the avenues for black to get counterplay is to attack along the c file. Bishop e4, knight b4, pressuring the c2 pawn, c3, now creating a weakness on d3 and bringing white's pawn closer to black's territory. So at some point, the pawn move b4 may become possible. Bishop e4, minor pieces start being traded, which generally favors black. Queen e4, and then knight return to d5. a3, creating more weaknesses on the queen side. Knight b6, headed for the weak c4 square we'd have discussed. Queen g4. White is trying to start a kingside demonstration, but black has everything under control. Knight c4, keep an eye on b2. Queen g3, rook d5, now targeting the main weakness in white's position, and maybe allowing rook d8 at some point. Bishop f4, queen d8, just adding pressure along the d file. Black went on the attack with bishop h6, but this was comfortably met with bishop f8. Bishop g5, the queen just goes to c7, continues to target the e5 pawn. Knight e4. White is desperately hoping for some play against black's king. For example, if black makes any moves to threat, there's actually knight f6 is a fork. So let's make a random move for black, and now knight f6 wins. This can't be taken because this leads to a very quick mate. Bishop g7, mate. If it is not taken, then black simply loses in exchange. Hence why black played the prophylactic move king h8. Knight f6, this is not coming with check, so the e5 pawn just drops. Rook takes g5, a small tactic. Bishop e7. Bishop f6 was also possible. Now rook takes f6 does not lead anywhere, as queen d8 ends the game. But g takes f6 was played. Black brings back defenders to the king's side. Rook e1, f5, just improving the position. a4, rook e3, and queen c4, hitting the rook. threatening the mate. Rook e1, and black kills all of white's hope for counterplay. After the queen trade, black is up too much material and white has no counterplay. After queen g4, white threw in the towel. An excellent display by the black side. White tried to attack the Kan, but the Kan's solid nature repelled white's attacking potential. The Kan is known for its solid nature, but many a player has fallen victim to the latent attacking potential of the Kan system. Here's one of the many Kan miniatures. You have your normal move order: e4, c5, f3, e6, d4, c takes, d knight takes, a6. And white goes for the Marazzi bind. Knight f6, attacking the center. Notice the move e5 is not possible here, as queen a5 check picks at the pawn on e5, a pattern we have studied before. Bishop d3. The main drawback of this move is it leaves the knight on d4 undefended, and black takes the opportunity to develop with tempi. Knight c6. White does not want to go back, so they take on c6, releasing the tension. D takes c6 is the best move here, as black is aiming to play e5, solving the problem of the bad bishop on c8. Castle, and black goes e5. King h1, bishop c5. This bishop is developed actively on the a7 g1 diagonal. Knight c3, and black goes after the white's position with knight g4. As we can see, black has an advantage on the dark squares on the king's side, as the bishop on c1 has not been developed, and f2 is a very easy target for black to sink his teeth in. f3, and the shocking move knight takes h2, as the king's position is still mated. Black opens a line, rake at attack. White resigned on the spot, seeing after most logical moves, queen h4 will finish the game. Main line being king takes h2, queen h4, mate. If the rook moves, then there's a forced mate in 6. Queen h4, mate is unavoidable. Here's another quick kill in the Sicilian Kan. You have all the normal moves. By now, you should be getting familiar with the move order. Back into the Marazzi bind. Knight f6, putting pressure on the center. Bishop d3, and our move here is knight c6, exploiting the fact that the knight on d4 is undefended. D takes c6, removing one of the obstacles from the light square's bishop diagonal. e5, releasing the light square bishop to become active. Knight c3, bishop c5, taking an active post on the g1 a7 diagonal, pressure in f2, a focal point in this variation. Bishop d4, preserving our bishop. Knight g4, going after the dark squares on the king's side, as white has majority of their pieces on the queen's side. The king's position is somewhat bare. h5. This is a typical motif, especially in the fish and pole variations. Queen h4, bringing pieces around the white's king. Queen g3 with coordination. Threat of queen h2. h2 g4 was forced. h2 is g4. Black has full coordination on the king's side, and despite being a piece down, Black is completely winning. Rook h2, the final coordination against the g2 pawn. White is completely lost in only 16 moves.
Let's see what would happen if white tries to defend with bishop f1. Black would do the old swing back, queen h4. Now that the white king is still mated, rook h1 is mate. g3, rook h1 wins here, but an even more optically pleasing variation is the move queen takes g3, exploiting the pin, bishop g2, and queen takes g2 mate. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to pass them in the comments below. I will be happy to answer any questions. If you liked the video or found it informative, do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you next time as we continue to build your Kan repertoire.